3 months ago, I stood up before our state and I made a vow, and that was to fight for victims of domestic and gender-based violence, and a vow to fix loopholes that denies them justice and very often puts their lives in danger, and a vow to stop cowardly abusers from walking free over minor technicalities that have nothing to do with the case before them. And I made a vow to make the changes necessary without undermining the original intent of the laws. But as we look at the unintended consequences of the 2019 reforms, you can imagine the shock, the confusion, and the fear that so many victims now feel. They feel it when the judge pounds the gavel, when the cuffs come off, the front door opens, and their abuser walks into the streets and back into their lives. No punishment, no order of protection, emboldened, and sometimes just hell-bent on revenge. These are the women and their families we're fighting for. And this is the reason I'm standing firm and why I'll refuse any state budget deal that does not fix the fatal flaw in these discovery reforms. What inspires me is that I think about the survivors that I've met, especially over the last few months, and their harrowing stories of survival, but I'm in awe of their strength. And I think about my own mother and how her childhood was torn apart, living in an environment of domestic violence, and how she spent the rest of her life fighting for survivors, being their voice at a time when people were not talking about them, back in the 70s. They had to live in the shadows. They had no one fighting for them. I'm still inspired by my mom. I want to be her voice on behalf of these people as well. Her spirit still guides me today, and that's why I cannot and I will not back down. So let's take a moment and ask how we got here. How is this system failing so many survivors? Now, in 2019, we did reform the laws. And on one hand, I will say the changes were long overdue. They ensure that piles of evidence aren't dropped on defense lawyers the eve of a trial, making it unfair for the defendant, and that no one languishes in jail for long periods of time without having the case presented before them, before they even get a trial to determine their guilt or innocence. We didn't want that then, and we don't want that now. Anyone charged with a crime deserves to have the evidence against them presented. We all can agree on that. However, there are some devastating unintended consequences that we must address. The law now doesn't require prosecutors to turn over just relevant evidence. It requires them to turn over anything even remotely related to the subject matter under a very tight time frame. Otherwise, the entire case and the corresponding order of protection can get tossed, and it happens too often. This puts an enormous burden on prosecutors. The pendulum has absolutely shifted from one extreme to the other. And it's hard for them to comply with an overly broad standard where if they miss some random detail that has no impact on the defense, where they submit it a day late, and boom, you know what happens? Another abuser walks out the door. Now today, as some members of the legislature refuse to accept just common sense reforms, the State Office of Prevention of Domestic Violence has issued a startling new report with input from over 1,400 people, including survivors, their families, victim service providers, and law enforcement. It paints a system desperately in need of repair. It shows a stark increase in case dismissals and outlines how perennial predators weaponize the court system. The result is inflicting even more pain on their victims. Here in New York City alone, domestic violence case dismissals have spiked 26% between 2019, when the laws were passed, and 2023. 26%. In 2023, the last year we have data, 94% of domestic violence cases brought forward were dismissed. That's unconscionable, especially given how often these incidences can turn deadly. That same year, nearly 100 New Yorkers were killed in domestic violence incidences. Those were our friends, our neighbors. We can't ignore that. How many more lives have to senselessly be ripped away before we make a change? One report details some of the most gut-wrenching details and the dismissals. In one case, a Bronx woman who fled an abusive relationship was then beaten unconscious by a relative of her ex-partner. She was pregnant at the time, and when the police arrived for a wellness check, her broken jaw was wired shut. Later on, the entire case was thrown out because the police body cam video from that wellness check was submitted late. Another case out of Brooklyn, the defendant punched a woman in the face, kicked her, and spat on her in front of her kids. Absolutely craven, abhorrent behavior. It was dismissed. Why? Because a missing piece of auto-generated duplicative police paperwork was missing. Throughout the entire criminal case, where there are mountains and mountains of disclosed evidence over these small paperwork errors, it all just defies common sense. And it defies the spirit of the original reforms, which were intended to create a more fair and transparent justice system, not to serve as a means to deny survivors justice by letting abusers get off on technicalities. Let me be clear. I didn't fight to secure over $35 million last year alone just to help domestic violence, and then in turn watch these abusers walk free over frivolous paperwork errors. It's time to recalibrate the scales of justice. We can do this. I know we can. It's time to pass the common sense discovery changes that I proposed to protect families and stop domestic abusers once and for all. And it's time to recognize that it's never too late to do what's right. These modest changes would uphold the original reforms while preventing entire cases from being tossed. If a discovery error is not harmful to the defense, the court will have to look at whether the error will actually hurt the defense's case. We want fairness for the defendant here. Prosecutors will no longer need to waste time tracking down endless amounts of information that's absolutely irrelevant to the underlying case. I don't want prosecutors chasing pointless paperwork to help them build cases, seeking justice, putting perpetrators in jail. They have to get that work done. So here's what I want to say in conclusion. I urge every legislator still debating their position on this to look at this report, see what we've come up with. It's important that people see this. The work that's been done talking to 1,400 people across our state, trying to build a story about what is happening to New Yorkers under the current laws, because I know we can do better. I know we can. And I want those legislators to think about these victims and their families and their advocates who are begging us to just do something. Think about the shattered families uprooted and on the run. Think about the frightened children hiding under the covers as they block out screaming and crying. These are cases I knew all too well when my mother and our family started a home for victims of domestic violence because of what my mother had endured and what she had to witness as a child. We brought families with little kids to this home we created. And the kids had such hard eyes. They didn't know love. They didn't know an environment where two people cared about each other. But over time, because my mom's wonderful work, she was the best mom, best grandma, they felt loved. They felt secure. They felt the comfort of an environment that was not abusive. We saw them transformed, but they never should have been robbed their childhood like my mom was. They never should have lost that. If we don't stand up for them, then who will? It is on our shoulders. And at the end of the day, this is not a binary choice as people are trying to make it. Don't let anyone fool you. It's not a choice. We need a fair discovery process. We just need one that swings, like I said, back to the middle and stop letting dangerous domestic abusers off the hook. We can protect the rights, the core essential rights of defendants while holding people accused of crimes accountable and bringing justice to survivors. I know we can do it. Do you think we can do it? I know we can do it. I know we can do this. Let's get it done once and for all. It is now my privilege to introduce our next speaker, a woman who's devoted her career to supporting survivors and helping them rebuild their lives. Ladies and gentlemen, Executive Director of the State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, Kelly Nichols Owens. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for the ability to continue to serve the women and the people of the state of New York, especially those who are voiceless. I know what the governor expects of me as a member of her cabinet, and that is to go out and to listen to people, to ask them how they're being treated by the systems we are supposed to have in place to protect them. So we did that at OPDV. We went out, we talked to survivors, we talked to stakeholders, we talked to law enforcement, we talked to the courts, we talked to the advocacy community. And what's really clear is when you listen to them, what they tell you is they want to feel valued. They want to feel heard. They want to know that we're behind them. And the governor has empowered us to find those solutions in a way that no other governor has done around this issue because of her personal experience and because what she knows and what she asks us to do is to do the right thing. So what do? So we go out and we listen to real people. The governor laid out discovery reform and what it means, but to real people, what they want to know is the system's working for them so that when they walk into a courtroom, they know they're going to walk out safer. That's not what they feel. I personally had an experience watching a couple years ago, a survivor literally walking into the courtroom. No one spoke to her. She sat back. She knew it was going to happen. And she said in very loud voice over and over again, "He's going to kill me. He's going to kill me." And Stevie, my chief of staff, was with me, and we both just sat there thinking, okay, please, somebody speak up. And she knew it was going to happen, and it happened. And she ran out of the courtroom, and I followed her. And I said, wait, please, let me talk to you about how we can plan safety. She goes, I'm done with you people. So if the system doesn't work for people, they don't seek safety. If they can't trust that what we're doing is in their best interest, they're done. The reports that we're talking about today are a compilation of many things. And it does involve the voices of sexual and domestic violence survivors, those who do the work every day. We are intentional about going out and talking to survivors in a way this agency hasn't before. We are also out there making sure that those doing the work, boots on the ground folks, are telling us what's working and what's not working, so we can bring policy and programming ideas to the governor. And she's listened. She's listened to us on the Strive initiative. We're investing in coordinated community response. She's listened to us on flexible funding to get survivors the money they need, no strings attached, when they need it, out the door so they can find safety. No other state's doing that. No other governor's doing that. Nobody's doing that. We also, the governor knows, if you want to find safety, you got to talk about affordable housing because you can't leave people in shelter. And this year, when the wonderful advocates around sexual assault brought us the data and the reports that they had around how sexual assault victims were being treated when they showed up at a hospital for a rape exam. She listened, and she said, no more. We're going to mandate that if you walk into a hospital, you're going to be able to get a rape exam, and it's going to be humane. So we've done all those things, but the system is still broken. So this discovery form is incredibly important because real people don't understand why the system doesn't work for them. We can talk about whether or not discovery reform is the change that everybody thinks it should be. But at the end of the day, if discovery reform does not go through, I will assure you that there are victims and survivors who will go home less safe and that could die. That's the truth. It's really simple. So, Governor, as always, thank you for you being you and you being the fighter that you are. And Governor and I have done a lot of things together over the past 10 years. And I know, don't ever pick a fight with Kathy Hochul because she's going to win. So I'm glad I worked for you. I'm glad you are who you are, and I appreciate so much what you do for victims and survivors. So I get to introduce Nat. So Nat Fields is a leader in the area of gender-based violence. He runs the largest domestic violence shelter in the country. In the country, we'll say that. It's definitely in New York, but it's the country right now.
You can say the world if you want.
The world. And he does a wonderful job, and he's an innovator in areas. Sometimes this industry doesn't like to innovate. We are really scared as gender-based violence program administrators to innovate. That's not Nat. Nat does accountability programming in a way that works. And for folks in this field, we're all really afraid of accountability programming, working with those who offend, but Nat does it, and he does it well. He's also innovated around pets, because we know that women stay, and people stay in their relationship because they don't have a place to take their pet. He's been doing an incredible amount of work in that area. But I think Nat's most important job is as a member of the New York State Fatality Review Team. As OPDV does fatality reviews for a year. And our job is to really dig into cases and figure out what went right and what went wrong. And we know each other pretty well. He's always the snappiest dresser in the room. But Nat's thoughts and how we think about this is incredibly important to the state of New York, and he is a leader. So thank you, Nat.
Well, good afternoon, and of course, I want to thank Governor Hochul and so many members of the administrative team for their commitment to survivors of domestic and gender-based violence. And as you've heard, I'm Nathaniel Fields, and I have the pleasure of leading Urban Resource Institute, URI. And I'm going to talk a little bit of why discovery reform is so important. However, I want to talk a little bit about the systems. We are a provider, and we've been around for about 45 years, so we've been at this for a minute. And I want to set the stage, and trust me, I'm going to get to discovery as I talk about those risk factors. You know, in New York State, you're going to read in the report, so I'm going to just highlight some things. In 2018 to 2022, there were about 613 domestic violence homicides. So stay with me here. For all women over the age of 16, about 40% were killed by an intimate partner. So if you're over age 16, about 40% of women were killed by an intimate partner. And men were killed also, but just about 2%. We're in New York City, so we got to talk a little bit about New York City data. In 2023, NYPD, which is not atypical, answered about 250,000 domestic incident reports. And while major crime fell, intimate partner homicides increased, and unfortunately, disproportionately so for Black and Latinx women. So URI, as you heard from the governor and you heard from Kelly, we've committed to ending domestic and gender-based violence, and we do a lot of work in the homeless space. And we, again, over 4 decades of doing this work. And to this end, we've been able to provide a lot of safe shelter beds. When someone is ready and in need of a safe bed, it's important, right? Because you heard those stats, it's often life and death. And we have the pleasure on any given night in New York City, we have about just under 4,000 of those safe beds for themselves, women, children, and sometimes men. There are a lot of risk factors, and we try to break down some of these complexities. When you heard Kelly talk about, we don't want to minimize any of these risk factors. So when we heard about 50% of victims of domestic violence wouldn't leave that abusive relationship because they had a pet, and back in 2012, New York City didn't allow pets in domestic violence shelters. We partnered with the animal welfare community. We did something about that. Now we can treat the whole family together. And in 2018, we passed the 2018 Pets and Women's Safety Act. I sit on the Fatality Review Committee. Such an important office, important work, I should say. It sits under the OPDV, headed by Kelly Owens. And we see some of the most tragic cases, and it's difficult work. Some of my colleagues are here today. That work, criminal justice, judges, DAs, we're all sitting there together to understand what happened. Where did the system fail? And there was a 16-year-old girl we talked about in upstate New York, and she was tragically killed by her boyfriend. And many of her friends in school said, we knew something was wrong. They just didn't know how to help her. That's why New York State, we're doing some innovative work. I'm so proud that we're able to be in junior high schools and high schools with our relationship abuse prevention program. Imagine if we can engage young people as we do and identify those signs of domestic violence and talk about where to get help. That community is so powerful. I've been around for a minute. It gives me hope to say one day we will end domestic and gender-based violence. We've also turned our attention to those who are harming people through our abusive partner intervention work. Accountability is always at the center, but we've heard from so many victims that they're not always ready to leave, and we know we have to respond. And if we don't engage with those individuals, they will only go on to harm another family. So as we continue to understand the many risk factors that impact survivors seeking safety, we know we need to deepen and expand our work with our partners in the field of government to ensure survivors have options to the various barriers they face. So I'm always very careful when I talk about reform, but these risk factors are pronounced. And that's why you see me on stage with the governor, with Kelly, and with so many other people talking about why we need to make these reforms. Our solution must also include support for survivors as they navigate the legal system. URI centers survivor as they navigate the legal system. When the survivor seeks justice through criminal legal system, they should be confident. They should be confident knowing that the system is set up to deliver it to them. That means that cases and orders of protections are not dropped on technicalities. We just cannot drop these cases on technicalities. Survivors are failed so many times, first by the person they believe loved them, and then at times by the systems that are not always set up to support them. So right now, we do have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to strike a better balance, and we must seize this opportunity. I'm committed, for one, and I hope you are, to continue to work with the governor, OPDV, and all stakeholders to support survivors by implementing the findings contained in the reports being released today. Our work is so vital, and our work is unwavering. So we need to make that unwavering commitment that we must never allow these technicalities to get in the way of survivors being able to seek safety. So I want to borrow the tagline and say, let's get it done. And I want you to join me saying, let's get it done. Governor, all yours. Thank you.
And that concludes today's program. At this point, we ask that all attendees please make their way to the elevator bank. Thank you for attending.
Kelly here from TV.
All right. Any questions?
Governor, what's the holdup? Are you waiting for the DAs to accept your offer? How come you can't shut it down?
This is a very robust negotiation. There's a lot of give and take. Certainly the DAs have their opinions. I have my opinions that align very closely to the DAs. But they're also working with the Senate and the Assembly on addressing their concerns. So it is very much a fluid process that has been ongoing longer than it needs to. I put forth my proposal back in January. So what I've looked for has been out there for debate and discussion. And, I think we could get to a resolution fairly soon on this. I have been trying to push this process with some level of urgency since I first started meeting with the leaders prior to the budget process, which began when the one houses were dropped in probably around, I think it was actually St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. But we've had countless meetings. So there will be a resolution to this, and I'm not signing a budget that does not have the common sense, public safety, and affordability measures that I introduced back in January.
But Governor, part of this
Did you-
also has to do with stuff out of your control, right? So the NYPD Commissioner Jess Tisch a couple weeks ago said she supports the efforts to make these changes, right? But a big problem of this is a lot of the times you can't even access NYPD records in a normal amount of time, especially along this timeline that's outlined, not just with discovery, but also with speedy trial. So are you looking into that at all to make it easier and compel the NYPD to give up these records?
The NYPD knows they play an important role in the process of gathering information requested or obligated through discovery that needs to be disclosed from the prosecution to the defendants. Yes, they have an important role, and their involvement and expeditious manner in dealing with this is really important to the process. But this is one element, but there's so many more reasons why when you look at just even when they look at the weight of the evidence and give equal weight to something that is duplicative or absolutely irrelevant as if it's the most important piece of evidence in a case and give them equal weight and say, well, if you get that in a day late or it's duplicative, but I'm sorry, you should have provided that as well, and the case is dismissed, there's no justice for the victims. And that's exactly who I'm fighting for. You've heard me say it over and over and over, but you cannot come to an event like this and look in the eyes of people here and in the audience that have endured the unthinkable. And if we don't stand up now and speak for them, then we shouldn't be in these jobs. This is my job to stand up for everyone in the state and protect them, including victims of domestic violence.
Chris?
Hi, Governor.
Hi.
You and the DAs have been pushing for this measure since January, and you've been unable to convince the legislature and also the Black, Greek, and Hispanic Nation Legislative Caucus. Do you think the DAs hold less sway and power in Albany?
No, I think their voices are extremely important, and they're helping us craft a solution that'll help them do their jobs. But I want to remind everyone, especially those who are trying to misconstrue, misinterpret our objective here. It is not to undo and unwind all the 2019 changes to the public safety criminal justice laws. We know that there were a need to have swift evidence turnover. We don't want people languishing in jails for an indefinite amount of time. That's wrong. We want to make sure that prosecutors, don't have the upper hand and can ambush the defense the way it's happening now. So people need to understand, I'm not trying to unwind all that. There is a part of it. We have to look at what is required in discovery and the time frame and the reality and ask the question why. There's been a 26% increase in dismissals in domestic violence cases, for example, since these reforms went into effect. Why is that? And is that correct? Is that fair to these women who had the courage to finally step forward? You know how hard it is to leave a home with someone who's supposed to love you and you're raising your children, and they're abusing you and you've been putting it up with for years and years and years, and you finally get the courage to stand up and go down to that precinct, and you have to spill your guts and tell your life story to that police officer, then you have to do it again to a DA's office. This is hard. And we have to listen to them and know what they've gone through and give them some empathy, but also let them know that we are not going to tolerate a system that is stacked against them any longer. We need fairness for the defendant, but also We need to be talking about fairness for the victims, and that's what this is about.
All right, Rebecca, and then we'll move to Ops.
Governor, you said that there needs to be a give and take here. The legislative leaders say that they have given you multiple compromises. They have addressed what they believe are the concerns of the DAs, that they have come to the table, and that you have given them nothing. What have you given here, and what specifically about their proposals are so abhorrent to you that we are still negotiating this?
This is exactly what I'm not going to do, Rebecca, and that is to disclose the give and take of very important negotiations that'll come to a resolution in the near future. This is what we did. This is what we had to.
Rebecca, let her finish.
We had to do this with bail reform, where people said we'd never get bail reform. We got bail reform. People said we'd never get the change in the laws related to retail theft. We got the change in the law related to retail theft. People said we'd never get the enforcement for illegal cannabis shops. We got that done. I have a list of 39 measures that people, many in the press, said were not going to happen, or people said should not have been in my budget, that never would have become law, and every one of them has been better for New Yorkers outside the bubble of Albany, who are not paying attention to the give and take and people running to the press as soon as they walk out of a room to disclose something that sounds so exciting. Most New Yorkers don't care. They want to know, do they have a governor who's going to stand up for them and fight for them? And that's exactly what they have. I will get to a deal with them. We will get to a deal. But we have worked with the DAs, hand in hand with them, but also talking to the leaders about what's important to them. So any characterization that it's all been one side, that they're doing all the work and I'm just sitting there refusing to get involved is absolutely false. Absolutely. My team has been working nonstop around the clock, pushing paper back and forth, making edits, saying, how about this, how about this? So I just want to make sure you know that side of it, but I'm not going to disclose the elements of those negotiations.
How's that transparent then? Because you said that you are the most transparent governor in the history of the state of New York, but here you are continuing the back room, 3 people in a room. We're not going to discuss it until it's done. We're 2 weeks past the budget. The bail reform went into May.
That's right.
Most legislators expect to go into May. Don't New Yorkers deserve to know where things stand and not just have a governor who says, trust me, I've got your best interest at heart. I'm not going to tell you what the negotiations are. Just wait and see.
You know, Rebecca, I spend a lot of time out in the communities as well. I've yet to be asked by a regular New Yorker who's not a member of the press corps why the budget is taking so long. They don't care. They want to know, are you working on that affordability plan to put money back in my pockets when I'm sitting here so anxious because my 401k plan is going to hell, and I'm a farmer up in the North Country who's going to have to spend 100% more for everything they get from China or from Canada. So there's a lot of stress out there, and I'll tell you, one of the stressors on everyday New Yorkers right now is not the date that the budget's going to be done. I guarantee that.
Tell them then when they ask, I'm so worried about affordability, and you respond, great, well, I'm focused on discovery right now. My affordability issues are on hold until we do this one specific thing. How do they react to that?
And they also want me to be fighting for public safety. And that is my number one priority, and they know it. They know that I fought hard for those bail reforms, not 1 year, but 2. They know that I fought for common sense public safety reform since day one. They know I'm fighting because I'm trying to make a discovery system that does not allow criminals to walk free because of a technicality. I think most New Yorkers are glad I'm doing that.
Okay, we're going to move to Ops. Thank you, Kelly, for being here. Morgan, who hasn't asked one yet?
Hi, Governor.
Hi, Morgan.
Just wondering, have you guys come to any sort of negotiation, or what do talks look like right now when it comes to filling that $30 billion hole for the MTA? I know there was talk about increasing the payroll mobility tax or the payroll tax on businesses here in the city. Is that something you guys are still looking at? And then also, is there thought, just depending on how many weeks, go on, is there thought to maybe pull out some of the policy discussions from the budget as you guys continue to negotiate?
No, I mean, if you look at the budget, the Senate put in 170 policy initiatives. And interestingly, the Assembly, even in the late days, is also talking about some policies they'd like to see. So this is the vehicle that we can get a lot of important public policy initiatives enacted. But also many are dropped. Many are dropped, and we had over 200. I don't expect to see 200. A lot of them are asked by our agencies, administrative type changes, or, there's a lot of them that we run out of time for because we have been focused, just like the last few years, on a few signature initiatives that take more time. So there are other ones we can get to during the legislative process, no doubt about it. I fully expect that to happen. With respect to the MTA, we had early conversations. We will get to a place where we're going to have properly fund the next capital plan because it's essential. We cannot leave this over 100-year-old system to decay any further. Too many people in the past have kicked the can down the road, refused to make the tough decisions, and I'm not going to be that governor. So we'll get it done, but it all is in the context of the larger package. So I'm not going to disclose one element here that could possibly change before the end. But there will be a solution, an answer that will make sure that the MTA is on solid footing.
Okay, we got time for one more.
But
You
Governor,
guys do rocks, paper, scissors.
is now, we
we already-
can both go, equal opportunity. But Governor, to Morgan's question, now we've got tariffs, that are, here, there, maybe coming back. You want to balance the MTA's multi-billion-dollar capital plan on the backs of companies that could probably pay it if you tax them more. But how does that destabilize, I suppose, the tax base going forward? And as it is, you want to spend $10 billion more compared to last year's budget. Why not cut spending?
I don't think that destabilizes our budget. I will always have a budget that responds to the needs of New Yorkers. The largest drivers of our budget, as you know, are Medicaid costs. Many of those are mandatory. Their costs go up because the cost of health care goes up. It's not something I can control. We're trying. But also education costs. There's a strong sense in the state of New York that people want, and parents in particular, want their children to have the best opportunities for education. So there's a lot of support for our education budget. So we also know that with the headwinds with tariffs, which is, I don't know, it's hard to know whether they're up or down, but it has an enormously destabilizing effect on everything from Wall Street. New York has Wall Street and the main streets up in the North Country and Western New York that rely on that trade. So there's a lot of instability right now, but that doesn't mean that I don't have an obligation to get a budget done. We will get it done. And if there's if we have to come back because of cuts in Washington or other factors, I've spoken to the leaders, we'll come back and manage that going forward. We don't necessarily have to wait till next spring to address it. So we're prepared for whatever comes our way. That's, I know we'll get there. We'll get the budget done. Don't worry about that. The budget will be done, and we're also going to be able to deal with any future problems that surface. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate you
Thanks,
coming.
everybody.
Thank you.